to switch to another important press issue, media freedom issue, and certainly from the point of view of many issues around the world, interlocking with those two concerns, the freedom that was finally granted to Julian Assange after many, many years of persecution. And we are very honored to be joined here once again on the show to discuss everything coming now in the aftermath by Kevin Gosztola, who is the curator of thedissenter.org and also the author of Guilty of Journalism, The Political Case Against Julian Assange. Kevin, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey, Eugene, it's good to be with you. Although I must say, I'm a little disappointed that Rania can't be here with us to chat because I so wanted to share this moment of celebration with her.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, she's having a great time without us for sure. I won't say where she is for the audience.
She needs the vacation. I want her to enjoy herself. I know she's one of the hardest working journalists out there, as you do too.
Indeed. And as are you. And I hope that you're feeling great. I mean, you have done so much to help illuminate everything that has happened over the years vis-a-vis this persecution of Assange in so many different ways. And I guess maybe that's my first question for you here in this moment is how big is this moment really that Julian Assange has been freed?
Oh, it's massive. This is a testament to the movement that was organized by grassroots organizations, by campaigners and the Assange defense committees all over the world, journalist unions in Europe, press freedom organizations, civil liberties and human rights organizations that raised their voice. And then all of that bubbled up. And we discussed this before. During the last year, we had the Australian government, a close ally of the US, demanding that Julian Assange be set free, that this case be brought to an end. And the former Prime Minister of Australia traveled to Washington, D.C., and lobbied directly Biden administration officials. There were meetings between Biden and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese where this was brought up consistently. The Australian High Commissioner, the most senior diplomat, was on the charter flight when Julian Assange left from London to travel to Saipan. And I'm just, I couldn't even believe that this saga would come to an end in one of the U.S. territories or colonies that we have, that it was in this courtroom in Saipan that Julian Assange was declared a free man by a judge. And I'm not entirely sure, but I believe she's an indigenous person. It was quite an incredible moment to hear her oversee these proceedings, because you just wouldn't have had this kind of attitude from a judge if this had taken place in the Eastern District of Virginia outside of Washington, D.C. She said, "I hope that peace is restored for you, Julian Assange." And she also wished him a happy birthday because he turns 53 on July 3rd. And she said, this must be the first birthday in a long time that you won't be celebrating inside of a prison or some kind of limitation, because he spent 14 years in some form of arbitrary detention, prison in Wandsworth, London, house arrest, Ecuador's London embassy for 7 years, and then 5 years in Belmarsh Prison, known as Britain's Guantanamo.
I mean, really, it was an amazing saga. There were so many different elements. The CIA, I think, at one point plotting to kill him. I mean, it was such a Byzantine process. But I think it's important to remind people again, and I think it's such a great opportunity that this is the ending of the case, but why he was targeted to such a degree, because, I mean, they really, truly, literally went to the ends of the earth to try to silence Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.
Okay, so shameless plug, but I'm going to shameless plug here. I'm very pleased that this is now a history book, but this was written by me. I worked on this. My publisher at Censored Press, which is part of Project Censored, made it possible for me to do this book, Guilty of Journalism, The Political Case Against Julian Assange, that lays out how this all started. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a little tangent. He actually did plead guilty to journalism when he was in court. I had no idea that this was going to happen, But he was asked by the judge to articulate what he did. And he said, working with my source, I published information that the US government claims was classified that I understand the US government says is a violation of the Espionage Act. I don't believe it was. I think it was protected by the First Amendment, but I see that the First Amendment is in contradiction with the Espionage Act. And so basically, he said in court that he committed journalism and he's guilty of journalism. I could not believe that this was happening in these proceedings. That normally that's not what would have been said in court, but I think it also has something to do with the judge who was very lenient about how things were handled in these proceedings. So Julian Assange was able to express his discontent about facing this charge. How this all began? I mean, this all began in 2010 and 2011 when Julian Assange and WikiLeaks published Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, US State Department cables, Guantanamo prisoner files, the collateral murder video that showed an Apache helicopter attacking two Reuters journalists in Baghdad, gunning down innocent Iraqi civilians, one of them in a van trying to rescue the wounded Reuters employees. And there were rules of engagement files as well that went along with this. So you could tell clearly that it was a war crime in Baghdad that was committed. Chelsea Manning provided the material to WikiLeaks, endured great suffering. She ended up having her sentence commuted by Barack Obama. Julian Assange was not charged initially, but again, he went through this lawfare. He went through this targeting by the US government. People who were associates of WikiLeaks were targeted regularly. And then he entered the Ecuador embassy in London in 2012. Rafael Correa granted asylum. Rafael Correa, a great anti-imperialist opponent of the United States. And then you had him in this embassy. And by 2017, with Donald Trump in office, the Justice Department was ready to go after and prosecute. Mike Pompeo at the CIA was out for vengeance because they published CIA hacking materials, and they were putting the entire embassy under total surveillance. They had sketched war plans, reportedly, according to a Yahoo News article that had more than 30 different sources from the Trump administration and U.S. Intelligence agencies. They were plotting to kidnap or rendition Julian Assange to the United States, poison him, go so far as to assassinate him. And he ended up then, through a pressure campaign, being forced out of the embassy. He was arrested on April 11th, 2019. I believe what you're showing there on the screen. He was put into a police van by British authorities, and then he was brought to Belmarsh, where he lived in conditions 23 hours a day, 22 to 23 hours a day. He was very, very isolated. And I mean, this was harsh. And also, there's a story that a lot of people don't really know, but there was a person there, an LGBTQ person who was there, who I understand he was gay and did not want to be deported back to Jair Bolsonaro's Brazil. He was a tenor. Julian Assange enjoyed listening to him sing. In fact, the UK government refused to give him protection and asylum. So he took his life. He committed suicide not far from where Julian Assange was being held. And this was a tragedy that Julian Assange had to endure. Julian Assange survived the COVID-19 pandemic in prison, deadly for so many prisoners around the world. Okay, but now he's free. And we can talk about what the precedent is for press freedom, but by and large, this is a major defeat for the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Division of the Justice Department, because I think through punishment by process, they would have been happy if Julian Assange had died in prison, and they would have been happy if they never had to deal with Julian Assange again. The last thing they ever wanted after putting so much energy and time into this was to see Julian Assange walk onto a plane and fly to freedom.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very good point, and I think we should talk about the precedent that's set. I mean, I know that there's some saying, well, he did plead guilty, but I thought Stella Assange also spoke to this, saying that in many ways, one of the factors she thinks contributed to him being released is that the government was afraid to test the First Amendment defense that could, if he won, then sort of obliterate the Espionage Act's ability to intimidate journalists. So, there's, I guess, two sides to that coin. How do you see it?
Something happened. The High Court of Justice actually did something good for Julian Assange back in May. They granted an appeal hearing, and it was going to be on a narrow issue, but it was going to be about the First Amendment. And the fact that the US government was saying so clearly that because he's an Australian citizen with no ties to the United States, he has no First Amendment rights. And because the High Court of Justice believed that he should be able to make some kind of claim that he had First Amendment rights to protect him from this Espionage Act prosecution, they said, well, he's prejudiced due to his nationality. He would be, because any US citizen would have much more ability to challenge, at least in my position. I'm going to take the position of Julian Assange because I could be. The journalist who is an American would have more ability to invoke the First Amendment than somebody who is a foreigner. I know that's kind of crude to say, but someone who is not from the United States would have a much more difficult time. And under extradition law, you are supposed to have equal access to any defenses that are typically available to citizens of that state. And you're not to extradite somebody if they will be prejudiced. That made the US government reconsider how aggressively they were pursuing Julian Assange. I think they were afraid of what would happen with this proceeding because his own attorney, Barry Pollock, as well as an Australian attorney, Jen Robinson, they both said that was when the Justice Department returned to the negotiating table and was more serious about a plea deal. And they offered so many incredible things. I never would have imagined they would have offered Julian Assange, Eugene. They said that we will not prosecute you. They put this in writing, by the way, for people who are like, how are they going to enforce this? They put this in a court document that has a force that he cannot be prosecuted for anything he did prior to this plea deal. Nothing. There can be no criminal charges brought further. I know there are people who say he's now in Australia. What if they tried to indict him and go through Australia to try to extradite him to the United States? They can't, and unless he engages in more journalism after this, which he might choose to do. There are no criminal cases to be pursued. Also, there's no gag order. He can talk about anything that happened with this case. There's no prison time. There's no supervised release or probation. Australia is not imposing any restrictions on Julian Assange. And then, beyond that, the U.S. government, basically decided that they were not going to get him for publishing information. They weren't going to get him for the password cracking that they alleged with Chelsea Manning. They just got him on a conspiracy charge. And all that means, Eugene, as you know about the justice system in the U.S., is that he was coerced into accepting a plea deal so he could walk free. Do we know how many people in this country every day by the thousands accept plea deals because they just want their freedom? They're going to confess to something they never did just so they can walk out of prison.
Yeah, no, I think it's an incredibly, incredibly important point, and I think the work you've done on this has been incredibly important, and we'll still keep pushing forward around everything that has been revealed about the potential attacks on press freedom. But Kevin Gosztola, curator of thedissenter.org and author of Guilty of Journalism, The Political Case Against Julian Assange, thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.